Why was it doing that?
Elden Ring is a wake-up call.
There we
no,
go.
I'm not talking about the players. This isn't a video about difficulty. Well, that does actually come up at some point in time in the video. But Elden Ring does something incredibly unique, something very special, something that the rest of the upper echelon of the video game industry just can't seem to replicate. And that's come out with a holistic, high-quality title that delivers on the player's expectations for under $70, not once, but twice.
Exactly. Once you pay your money, you get the game. You get the game. You don't have to spend an extra $5 here for cosmetic skin. You don't have to pay $10 here for world content to unlock a special area. No, you pay your $70, you got the game. That's it. That's it. And that's fantastic.
Elden Ring isn't just a great game. It's a case study on what games should be or should strive to be. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about
100%
today.
facts.
Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree hit a peak concurrent player count of over 780,000 players. I want to point out just how absurd it is that this is a DLC expansion that's wide.
Look at that peak, though. Almost 1 million. And that's just on Steam. That's just on Steam. Almost 1 million players.
Widely a single-player game that not only hit that high of a concurrent player count, but that's over 80% retention from the game's peak of its initial release, which was 950,000 players. Now, to add to this absurdity, the official Elden Ring Twitter account posted an image announcing over 5 million tarnished have entered into the realm of shadows.
That's amazing.
We aren't even mentioning that.
That's World of Warcraft numbers. You know, for a single player game that you could multiplayer, yes, with special mods or you could summon somebody. But that is World of Warcraft numbers. That's crazy.
According to Steam, at the time of this recording, only 40% of players have defeated Mohg to be even able to gain entrance into the DLC.
So 40%. We'll say 40%. We'll round up to a nice even number. 40% of players have beat Mohg on Steam, or that's just a Steam calculation. 5 million. Imagine if that was 100. 100% of people. So that's another, 15 million people? Unbelievable.
With now both Elden Ring and its DLC claiming top spots in Steam's top sellers, and likely the same for each platform the game is now available on. It's safe to say that Elden Ring is a massive achievement, one that's not only worth appreciation, but study. However, it is my firm belief that the games industry leaders have no intention of paying attention because emulating the success of FromSoft and Miyazaki require humility, talent, and vision, all things seemingly bankrupt from many of today's modern games. Something that I think
100%.
is really well represented when we start to look back at the most influential games over the past couple of years, Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, where when we compare these two, they become eerily similar.
So you remember when Baldur's Gate 3 released, everybody was... developers were mad on Twitter and Instagram and all that other stuff, saying that you shouldn't expect that from a game. But why not? Why can't you expect to get that from a game? Why can't I expect that when I pay you my money that I worked for as a developer to give me the game? Why? Why is that so hard to deliver, right? I don't know how you guys feel about it, but when I pay money, I don't want to pay more money for something that's already on the disc. This doesn't make sense to me.
You see a direct thread of unaccountable developers distancing themselves from products that they know that they can't make themselves. If you don't remember, AAA developers from both Ubisoft and Guerrilla Games dogged on Elden Ring for getting a 97 on Metacritic and how it means that reviewers don't care about game's UI. Another developer unimpressed with the graphic stability and performance, and another one, from Horizon, talking about bad quest design. Now, in the case of Baldur's Gate 3, we had
jealousy.
Developers take a different approach. They use their imagination, realizing that they can't make players believe that, something they enjoy is actually bad. They preemptively tried to distance themselves before the release of Baldur's Gate 3, painting the game as an incredibly unique set of circumstances, unable to be repeated, and an unfair standard for future games to be compared to. Calling the game rockstar level nonsense for scope, saying baseline comparisons are a damaging thing to use, and my personal favorite from the Diablo 4 senior designer, Chris Balzer, saying, but people too often look at the fruits of labor and not the labor itself. Same as it ever was, I guess. Same deal with people wondering why there are so few artists painting like Renaissance masters.
We're not in a Renaissance. we're we're in 2024. This isn't the Renaissance, right? So don't compare that. Don't compare that.
Yes, Chris, we are wondering where the Renaissance masters were when you released Diablo 4, a 20-year-old franchise at this point that
Exactly.
remained in turmoil for the better part of a year. Please, tell me more about how much time and experience matter when it comes to developing great games. By this measure, Ubisoft's open world games should be untouchable masterpieces by now with how many games that they've been making. The controversies
100%.
surrounding both games prove a lack of vision and accountability. Jealous developers wishing that people talked about their games the way that they've been talking about Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3, but the biggest value that we received as players from this conversation was the transparent realization that these studios and developers genuinely do not understand the wants and needs of players, the same as our newfound kings in FromSoft and Larian.
No, the developers think that more is always better, but more isn't always better, right? I mean, I want something that I can sit down and play and not worry about anything else. Thank you so much for the lurk. I appreciate it. I want a single player game to where I can sit down and devise these plans and just have fun in the world, right? I want to be able to break the game. And if I break the game, I don't want it to be nerfed. I don't want it to be anything. So they have lost sight of what we want. They want these ultra detailed water particles that dance in the moonlight. No, I don't care about that. I care about the gameplay, I care about the story, and just let me have some fun.
You know, it's crazy. When you start to look back at some of these older conversations, you realize why the games industry is in the position it's in today. And you look at all these developers that are caught in the trap of thinking about things like high fidelity graphics and huge scope and overbloated
Yeah.
UIs when all of those things are serving to do is increase their budgets and bleed their profits. No wonder these guys have low
Hey Maggie, how are
expectations
you?
for
Thank you
future
for coming in.
projections of the industry. Huh, I wonder where that's coming from. The funny thing is that none of those things have anything to do with the reason why Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring were successful games. 5 seconds of scrolling social media is going to show you why players like those games. And it's pretty
Exactly.
simple. They're just good games. They're enjoyable. In Baldur's Gate 3's case, it was just the ability to genuinely have real choice in a video game. In Elden Ring, it's just a damn good game. And these opinions that these guys throw out there just go to show that they're not playing these games, and they're not playing these games with the eye of a player. They're playing it with the eye of somebody that's making their own game, and you need to change that
Exactly.
perspective.
They're also looking at it, how much money can we make off of this game? Right? They're always going to be looking for that next microtransaction. These two games have proven that you don't need the microtransactions to make a good game and be extremely successful. That's it. You don't need those microtransactions. Now, I'm not against microtransactions. I'm just saying you don't need all of those to make a really good game.
You want to know how to make a game as successful and as incredible as Elden Ring? Well, you have unyielding vision on what you believe players want to play, what you yourself want to play. And Miyazaki reveals that to us now. In a recent newsletter from The Guardian, Miyazaki gives his thoughts on game design and the current state of the video game industry. The Guardian writes, the famously challenging dark fantasy epic Elden Ring was the world's second best-selling game in 2022. And the release of its expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree, last Friday, once again has everyone arguing about whether it's too difficult.
No.
Every single FromSoft developed game since 2009's Dark Souls has inspired this discourse, and I'm not going to get into it because it's neither interesting nor particularly consequential. These games are what they are, and you can either get on board or, quite justifiably, walk away.
Exactly.
The vision is passed down from the game's director, Hidetaka Miyazaki, also president of FromSoft since 2014, having made his and the developer's name with Dark Souls in 2011. It's harsh, sure, but there's also an element of faith and encouragement in this approach to game design. Elden Ring and his other games trust that if you just persevere and call on other players for help, you'll triumph eventually, and
Yeah.
it'll feel all the sweeter.
And they encourage that in the game. Like, especially with adding all the summons and the mimic tier and just the curled fingers, you could summon people. They encourage teamwork. If you can't beat it, overcome it with somebody else. I don't look down on it. There's a lot of people in the community saying if you use summons or you use help, whatever, that it's a bad thing. No, it's not. Play the game how you want to play it. If you want to break the game, break the game. If you want to summon people, summon people. Use everything. Miyazaki even said it himself. He uses all of the game's features at his disposal to be able to play the game. That's all you got to do. Who cares?
Miyazaki is an interesting character and one of the most influential artists in games and indeed entertainment. He made Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People last year.
Nice.
I interviewed him in 2010, shortly before the release of Demon's Souls in Europe, and following his career has been one of the highlights of mine. I interviewed him again in Los Angeles recently, and it might comfort some to know that playing his games is sometimes torturous for him too.
This is what I just
Leading
said,
up to the release of a game, I'll be very hands-on playing it and getting as much time on it as possible, he said. But after the release, I tend not to want to touch it because I know that I'm either going to find things I left on the table or issues that will bug me. And once I become a player, I am powerless to do anything significant to change it. So once a game is out in the wild, I tend not to play it. But in preparation for Shadow of the Erdtree, I played through the main story of Elden Ring. I want to preface this by saying I absolutely suck at video games, so my approach or playstyle is to use everything at my disposal, all the assistance, every scrap of aid that the game offers, and also all the knowledge I have as the architect of the game. The freedom and open world nature of Elden Ring perhaps lowers the barrier of entry, and I might be the one who's benefiting the most from that as a player more than anyone else.
Nice.
Man, I love this interview, and I think it highlights something seemingly lost in games today. How many times have you asked yourself or thought to yourself whether or not the developers actually play the games that they make? FromSoft makes challenging games. However, Miyazaki wouldn't put the player through something if he hadn't experienced it firsthand himself.
So that's another thing, though. I think a lot of publishers aren't even playing their games. They're not even testing for bugs. Because how many times have you purchased a game and it has like a game-breaking issue that nobody even tested? And they just released it? And they're like, okay, well, we'll have to patch it. That should have been patched prior to the game's release itself.
To make sure that it's enjoyable, engaging, or not too impossible. Imagine Miyazaki being the worst Souls player while being the architect and visionary behind these games. Elden Ring is one of the very few games that I can point out and say the devs have played this a lot. And there are two things that I believe proves this. Respawn Stakes of America and the lack of microtransactions. Respawning at Stakes of America save the long runbacks to optional boss encounters or wherever you last died if it's that far away from your last site of grace. It's a subtle quality of life improvement, but it's necessary in a game like Elden Ring. Why do you think it exists? Likely because Miyazaki got tired of running back to where he died over and over again.
Probably.
It's something that would have only been realized through experience. Why does FromSoft not have microtransactions in their game? Because no self-respecting player and developer would sit and play a game and think, you know what's missing here? A way to be able to rip off the players rather than reward them for actually enjoying the game. I'm sure they'd love that. Sure, they could earn this set of armor by killing this unique NPC after a hidden quest line, but I think they'd rather buy it.
I've been good, Maggie.
You know, I would actually bet good money that the vast
well.
majority of some of the best quality of life features that we've seen in games likely came from developers playing their game through the eyes of a player extensively, exhaustingly even. And I realize that quality of life isn't necessarily the flashiest of video game design philosophies, but at the end of the day, it has an immeasurable effect on a player's experience while playing a game. Seriously, it's immeasurable. The vast majority of players aren't even going to notice when a quality of life feature isn't in place. Sometimes they'll call it out. They'll see another game that has something and point to the game they're playing and say, hey, why isn't that here? But more times than not, they're just going to have this general feeling of unease and frustration because the game isn't providing them with conveniences that it should.
Exactly.
Best example of this I can give is playing a survival game. The first survival game that I played that allowed me to be able to craft out of my storage rather than just only out of my personal inventory felt like a life-changing experience. Whoever was the one that designed the magic storage mod for Terraria, you're a saint. Look, it should be a requirement to play your own games, and I think the vast majority of developers that are out there do actually play their games, but I don't think that they're playing their games from the eyes or from the perspective of a player.
I'm glad you're
They don't
good.
have that
I hope the
same
kids
level
and
of
the husband's
empathy
doing
that's
good as well.
necessary to be able to
Mr.
understand what
John.
players are going to do. Think about how players are actually going to experience something. More times than not, they're probably hopping in there just to test what they put in. They're working after all. They clocked in.
Yeah,
They're working. So they're just there to test what they're doing, make sure it works, and then move on.
that's it.
And it takes a really high level of leadership and wisdom to be able to hand down the idea of trying to play the game as a player rather than just constantly be testing it. And that leadership is something it's just not in this industry right now. The interview continues. I was greatly amused by the image of Miyazaki, controller in hand, tormented by the very world he wrought and all its imperfections, which only he would notice. That's true commitment to his game design philosophy of improvement through failure, a creed that seems to permeate his whole life. Miyazaki is a hands-on director, and all his games bear an unmistakable imprint of his influence. But he has also been attempting to pass down his knowledge and artistic approach to others at From Software in the 10 years that he's been its president, ensuring that they too have the room to fail.
Oh, that's painful.
Budgets, scale, scope, everything has grown to the point where room for failure isn't tolerated as much as I think it was in the past, he told me. FromSoft has its own way of hedging risks, so to speak, in that most of our projects have a partner who's financing the project. From a business management perspective, we're not betting everything on one single project. At the same time, you have to find the right project to allow for failure, whether it's smaller in scope or scale or a small module of something bigger. There has to be room for that. I think that's where a lot of young game developers will be challenged and will be able to learn from it. Making sure you understand and identify where those pockets of failure can be allowed is how we try to grow our talent. Miyazaki views Elden Ring as a turning point for From Software. Before and after Elden Ring, there is going to be a clear difference. You could see that in 2023's mech game Armored Core 6, I would say. He hopes that we will soon be seeing from other game directors at the company, not just himself. Where FromSoft is right now in terms of scale, I would say Elden Ring is really the limit. We've tapped every resource and talent we have access to, scaling it even bigger. I have my concerns, perhaps having multiple projects is the next stage, where some of the other young talent can have the opportunity to manage and direct game design for a smaller project.
That's awesome.
Man, what I love about Miyazaki's perspective here is that it goes directly against the plans and perspective of most of the AAA industry's leaders. If we take time to look around the industry and look at different games that are being developed right now, we can easily point out ones and say, so what happens if that game fails? Dragon Age and EA as an example, a game that's been in development for 10 years now, going through multiple iterations, redesigns, and identity changes, something that isn't a surefire hit anymore as they've chose to reimagine what a Dragon Age game is.
Like, if you've ever played any of the other Dragon Ages, which I have, this is nowhere even close to what it even looked like. This looks like trash in comparison. But I'm not going to say that the game's trash until I actually play it myself. So
It's vaulting strategic combat and the darker themes the games used to have, trying to eye a more modern audience, obviously. A dangerous gamble, to say the least, when the games that were last released by this studio were Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. When the games industry seeks to scale itself infinitely, no wonder you have industry layoffs en masse. PlayStation, Spider-Man 2 as another example, $300 million to make, tripling the budget of Spider-Man 2018, only to sell the game to the same amount of players. The game's profits are now getting closer to the black than in the green. With all of this infinite scaling for fidelity, scope, and design, these bobblehead CEOs scale their projects and their projections the same as the game, and it's just not realistic. Knowing your limit before you reach it is an incredible act of humility on the part of FromSoft and Miyazaki. EA, Activision, Ubisoft, you know for a fact that if they had a game that was as successful as Elden Ring, they would be rushing to make the next version of it.
Yep.
Make it bigger, spend more, and expect better results.
Yep, and that's not going to happen.
But that's just not how games work. And I think it's something that's rarely recognized in games today.
You can't replicate the first time experiencing something. You can't. You can never replicate your first time, ever. No matter how much you try, you can have the same amount of people, have the same party, have the same everything that you had the first time you did it, but it's never going to have that same exact feeling. So Elden Ring was an experience, right? The first time you enter Elden Ring, it's an experience. You can't replicate that by making it bigger. You can't replicate it by spending more time and money on it. So you have to do something new. You have to take that chance. You can't just try to do the same thing and make it bigger or smaller, or just, you can't do that. You can if you have amnesia. You're right. You can if you have amnesia. That's a good point.
If we look around the industry and we see all the different
51st
iterations
dates.
on a lot of these titles, the first, the fourth, the fifth, or the 50th when it comes to Call of Duty, it's a crapshoot whether or not you're going to be able to retain the audience that you've already had, find more, find a new audience, or even retain most of the players that you had previously. And you can't keep pouring money into something thinking that you're going to get the same or better results.
Exactly.
That's a major gamble. That's what's really beautiful about the words of Miyazaki, is that he says we don't bet everything on one single game, one single project, nor should you. And I think a lot of studios that are out there do, and that's one of the reasons why so many people have been losing their jobs. And what's really incredible about the
You're
success of
Tory for
Elden Ring
Finding
and
Nemo.
Baldur's Gate 3 is that players are going to be coming back to buy these games, not because they're looking for Baldur's Gate 4, not because they're looking for Elden Ring 2, but because they want to play a FromSoft game, because they want to play a Larian Studios
Yes.
game. And that's something that's been lost. There are studios that players are still doing that with today, but that used to be a lot of these industry leaders. I remember the days where I used to look up, oh man, it's an Activision game. I know that's going to be a banger. Oh, it's going to be an EA game. That's going to be a solid game. But we don't think that way anymore because these studios and these leadership of these companies has gotten so far away from the player that they don't even recognize what we look like anymore. Now, closing out the interview, Miyazaki mentioned something that's rather interesting, saying that this is the end of Elden Ring for now, but also that he wouldn't mind seeing what someone else could do with the lands between in a different medium. I don't see any reason to deny another interpretation or adaptation of Elden Ring, a movie, for example, he told me. But I don't think myself or From Software have the knowledge or ability to produce something in a different medium. So that's where a very strong partner would have to come into play. We have to build a lot of trust and agreement on whatever it is we're trying to achieve, but there's interest for sure. Now, while I love the idea of an Elden Ring TV show or movie, I think the only one that's capable of doing it justice would be Peter Jackson. I mean, basically, you're going to need something Elden Ring level to be able to compete with Elden Ring. My real takeaway is Miyazaki saying, we are done. And FromSoft deserves to say that. Near the beginning of this video, I brought up how it requires unyielding vision to make a game as great as Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And that relentless vision and identity of who and what From Software is as a studio and what games they aim to make is the real wake-up call for this industry. I want you to keep in mind that players and reviewers lamented about the game's difficulty at launch, and even now again with the DLC. Just recently, Bandai Namco responded to the players telling them to just go level up their Scadutree blessings. While sure there's going to be some day one balancing or performance issues, FromSoft doesn't run around trying to save face. They just continue to work and give the game time to breathe. Players love the feel of playing a FromSoft game because they don't resort to the now standardized practices of hand-holding that much of the industry relies on. They are going to lead you through the game by your nose. FromSoft's expectations is that you as a player will play the game, and they trust that you are going to have the ability to find solutions to challenges and use the tools provided on your own.
Figure it out. Get good. All right? Level up. Farm runes. Do what you have to do to beat the next area. It's easy. I'm not going to, well, it's not easy. It's hard, but a good hard. That sounded bad. I want to continue the video now.
There's something to be said about having faith in the players. I've said this in the past or in previous videos, but leadership is really what's lacking in most of the games industry. When I look at a game like Elden Ring, when I play a game like Elden Ring, I can feel its respect for the audience. I can feel like I'm playing a game that's made for me. And that's a rare feeling outside of a few select releases and indie games today. Why is it so rare? Because the vast majority of the industry doesn't have the presidents and CEOs of their companies being people that worked as directors or developers of their games. There is less vertical promotions and more outside hiring. As the video game industry begins to fuse with the entertainment and tech industry, placing all these different marketing minds and career CEOs into these positions of leadership, there is a unique insight that's lost that only comes while working in the trenches. That customers aren't just customers, they're players.
Exactly.
You're not selling a product, you're selling an experience. Experiences have identities. they can't be made for everyone. And you have to be okay with serving a target audience and not trying to grow your audience infinitely.
He's got some slowdown
More games
there.
today are released with a lack of identity. More leadership is questioning how to make more money, and their only response is to appeal to a wider audience. However, the broader that audience, the more diluted that experience, and the less likely you are to make a game that leaves a lasting impact on players. You have to be okay with leaving some of them behind. We crave impact. We crave game studios and games that have an identity, a unique experience that we know that we can only get from that one studio. The more watered down your games become, the less recognizable they are. Players know when they're playing a FromSoft game because only FromSoft makes games like theirs.
Exactly.
That's why they have the ability to release Armored Core 6, selling almost 3 million copies in a month and a half after its release, whereas Armored Core 5 only sold 400,000 copies. FromSoft has a reputation. FromSoft has
What's he
integrity.
think it is? A broken rig?
FromSoft knows their players. You know, still to this day, I vividly remember the first time that I played Demon's Souls, right when it first came out, played it on PS3, and I remember sitting there thinking, this is the first time I've played a game where it felt like my imagination just spilled out onto the screen, whether it was some of the older anime that I had watched or Berserk or whatever it might be. It was my imagination realized. It was the first game that I felt was the closest to perfection that any game had ever been before. And the reason why, and this is something that took years to be able to kind of figure out, is that even after all the different Souls games, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, there's a certain level of sincerity in their game design. They know what they're trying to make. They know who they're making it for. And they know themselves what kind of games they like. And some of that does come down to knowing that you're going to end up turning off a wider audience. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be able to prepare for yourself and be able to prepare your company for those kind of things. And that's one of the things that he brings up, where he's talking about how they, prepare themselves for failure, because they don't know if things are going to work, but they know who they're trying to make that game for. And that's the most important thing. Helldivers 2 CEO had said it best before. A game for everyone is a game for no one. And I think that Elden Ring proves that there is a wide audience, a massive audience for games that have a strong identity, know what they are, but can still be able to make themselves a little bit more accessible.
Not only a wide audience, but generations too. Like, you have teenagers to 30-year-olds to 40-year-olds, 50s, even 60-year-olds are playing this game. Like, they have generation gap, and they figured it out. They figured out how to reach every single person with their games.
Sure, it may not be as hard or as difficult as some other Souls games that are out there, but it's a game that proves that if you have an idea of the audience that you're trying to make a game for, sometimes it can reach even higher than that. That game has to be sincere. That game has to have an identity. And Elden Ring does. From Software does. And I feel like that's probably the biggest wake-up call of all, is that the vast majority of the industry just doesn't seem to have much of an identity anymore. I don't know who they're making games for. They're making games for everybody, but not everybody's going to play these games. Hell, not everybody even plays games to begin with. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you guys for watching this long. If you guys did watch the video, think about liking, subscribing, sharing the video to everybody else.
Yeah.
I just hit 80,000 subscribers. It's only been a year, a little over a year since I started making videos, so that's wild, actually. That's wild. So, yay me. Pats on the back. Claps for you guys for joining. Thank you so much.
Hell yeah.
I guess it's the road to 100K.
I'm going to go ahead and link this video in the chat.